the US will immediately lift the pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance to Ukraine. Now, look, at this moment, I'm going to bring you some breaking news. Literally, as you saw, my colleague there brought this into me, this piece of paper. I have in my hand a piece of paper. And what it tells us is, I'll read it to you. The U.S. State Department, in joint U.S.-Ukraine statement, says the U.S. will immediately lift the pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance to Ukraine. So, well, some sort of progress. And I've got a further statement here, which I'll read to you in a moment. It doesn't give us a great deal of detail, but it does tell us in this initial statement that the block on intelligence to Ukraine, which has been of such a help to Vladimir Putin and exposed troops on the ground for Ukraine to such, well, extra peril, that has now been lifted. And Ukraine has also, it is said in this further statement, accepted in principle the idea of a 30-day ceasefire. That presumably, it doesn't go into any further detail, but that presumably leaves the ball with Russia. Do they therefore accept these terms? Because that would need to be the other part of that unfinished sentence. However, the intelligence block is lifted. Arms can now resume. What do you think, Tim? I mean, it is shocking that ban was ever there.
Yeah, well, I watched an interview with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, yesterday, in which he was asked to justify the pausing of intelligence sharing. And he said, well, it's a way of bringing Ukraine to the negotiating table, which I wasn't really convinced with. We've been on this programme sharing sort of Trump and Ukraine narratives for a while, John, and I largely defended or tried to defend and understand what America was doing in our exchanges.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand or defend the pausing of intelligence sharing. And, last week, the horror...
And the supply of arms.
Absolutely. The horror last week of Trump saying, when Putin had used the cover of that intelligence pausing to launch extra attacks on the infrastructure of Ukraine, to say, well, that we would have all done that, wouldn't we? No, we wouldn't have done. And so, I don't know why America took that action, but at least it's now Ukraine will get the intelligence sharing it needs. And finally, the ball will be in Putin's court. If there is going to be this offer of a ceasefire, will Putin take it up?
Yeah, what are you thinking right now, Rachel?
I'm just remembering that astonishing quote from Keith Kellogg, who's Trump's Ukraine envoy, last week about the suspension of intelligence sharing. And he said it's like hitting a mule with a 2x4 across the nose. It gets their attention, making it very obvious that this was a very dramatic, very crude way of essentially blackmailing Ukraine to the negotiating table, but without, it would appear, any kind of equivalent persuasive action on the Russian side.
Yes.
And we should be very clear that Ukrainian soldiers will have died because of this. This was immensely damaging. And to talk about it in that sort of very flippant way, well, we've got their attention now, is when discussing an ally of the US, or a country that is supposedly still an ally of the US, is absolutely shocking. I mean, if it does lead to a ceasefire and some kind of lasting peace, if it does get them both around the negotiating table, if there are further concessions that the US is able to get out of Russia as well as Ukraine, then great. I think everyone wants this war to end, but I don't think in any way that justifies the suspension of intelligence sharing, and I think it is a very, like I said, a crude and dramatic lesson to other countries that consider themselves America's ally, as to the kind of reliable ally that the US is, or in fact is not.
Can I just add, if I may? Look, we can look back, and we should look back. People will be looking back through the period that we have just lived through for a very long time, I think, because it's been an extraordinarily discombobulating experience for America to behave the way it has. Let's just hope, though, some of this statement, though, is quite encouraging. So it says here, the US State Department, both delegations agreed to name their negotiating teams and immediately begin negotiations towards an enduring peace that provides for Ukraine's long-term security.
Yes.
Now, if this is the beginning of America recognising what Europe has been demanding all along, you can't just have a ceasefire. There has to be underpinnings of long-term security of Ukraine.
Yes. Let's
hope this is the sort of thing you would have expected from America, the America most of us have grown up with, over recent years. It's not the thing we've been getting from America over the last few weeks. But this is almost like a return to normality. Now, it's just one statement on one day, and so let's not over-welcome it yet. But if this is the result of the sort of negotiations that Keir Starmer and others have been doing behind closed doors, maybe it is the beginning of America realising, just as the stock market reactions to the ridiculous tariffs policy has produced a resumption.
Which will be doubled down on by Donald Trump today, where Canada is
he hasn't yet
concerned.
acted on them, though. The rhetoric is doubled down.
Well, he's going to double the steel and aluminium tariffs. That is an announcement. And
when will that happen, though? Announcements
in a couple of days. That's going
I love how Tim's defence of Donald Trump is, don't worry, you don't have to believe anything that he says at the moment.
Announcements do have a habit on tariffs of not becoming policy.
Well, we'll come back to tariffs in a short while. But look, Marco Rubio, I've just been handed this to Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, who was at the table in Jeddah on the American side of the table. He says the ball is in Russia's court, and I guess that will be true. And we're going to see the test of American resolve here too. That if that's the case, if they have some sort of terms which they are now ready to put to Russia, and if Putin does not buy them, and so far he's shown no inclination to accept any terms for a ceasefire, then what? Then what does America do? We've seen the most colossal pressure exerted on Russia, on Ukraine, by the Trump administration, to a point which was frankly shocking. Nothing on Putin, and now we'll see whether they're going to put their action where previously their mouths were, because we've seen rhetoric in the past about putting pressure on Russia. I recall a good many months ago now, there was word from the Trump team that if it comes to it, we will just pour weapons into Ukraine and give it to Ukraine. That just went quiet. And the most recent thing that we heard was the possibility of more sanctions on Russia, including banking sanctions. And this against a country which has already suffered about as much as can be imposed by America on banks and on trade. There's almost no room for any more. And so the threat was pretty much meaningless. So what more will Donald Trump do? We'll see how that goes. And now we'll also see from these statements that as you say, the Ukrainian side and the American side will put together negotiating teams, and that is where the rubber hits the road. And we can cross now live, I'm told, to Jeddah, where Tim Walz and Marco Rubio, side by side on the American side, are addressing the media. Let's go there live.
Well, as has been clear from his first day as president, even as a candidate, President Trump is a president who wants to be a president of peace. His goal in this entire process has been to bring about an end to this war. It's a terrible war, a costly war, a bloody war. And his number one interest is ending this war once and for all. Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. I want to personally we both want to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty, for hosting us, for making this possible. They've been instrumental in this process, and we're very grateful to them for hosting us here today. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians, and we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball is now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Well, just to add to the Secretary's comments, the Ukrainian delegation today made...
Mike Walz speaking here. Let's stay with this live just for a moment.
Share President Trump's vision for peace. They share his determination to end the fighting, to end the killing, to end the tragic meat grinder of people and national treasure that's happening on the front in Ukraine. Number one. Number two, they made concrete steps and concrete proposals, not only accepting our proposal for a full ceasefire, which you can see the details of which are in our joint statement that we released together, but we also got into substantive details on how this war is going to permanently end. What type of guarantees they're going to have for their long-term security and prosperity, but also really looking at what it's going to take to finally end this the horrific fighting. The other piece that I just want to make very clear is President Trump started this diplomatic effort in the Oval Office, talking to both leaders, both President Putin and President Zelensky back to back. And now that shuttle diplomacy continues. We have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Russian side. We have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Ukrainian side. I will talk to my Russian counterpart in the coming days. Secretary Rubio will be with G7 foreign ministers
CEO Council here at the White House,
in the next
where he
couple
met
of
with
days.
key leaders
We
in
have the NATO
technology
Secretary
industry.
General.
And last night,
Okay, we're going to pull away there. We're getting a bit of a cross wire there. I'm not quite sure where from, but we get some of the thrust of what we're hearing there, and it was pretty significant stuff, wasn't it, from Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, and Mike Waltz, President Trump's national security advisor there. And from what we heard there, well, it sounded like some significant movement on both sides of that table in Jeddah today.